Imagine, if you will, a prison without walls.
Okay.
You walk outside your front door, you look out to the horizon, and there is absolutely nothing physically stopping you from just walking away.
Right.
There's no barbed wire to climb over, no concrete barriers. You won't even see a guard standing on the street corner.
But you don't run.
Exactly. You don't run. In fact, you don't even let yourself, entertain the thought of running.
Because the prison is in your head.
Yeah. And the people living right next door to you, they make sure you don't step out of line, just as you make sure they don't.
Wow.
You are living in a society so meticulously engineered to suppress its people that the citizens actually do the heavy lifting of policing themselves.
It really is the ultimate form of systemic control. I mean, when an architecture of oppression is perfected to that degree, the ruling class barely has to lift a finger to enforce their will.
Right.
The subjects literally become the architects of their own cages.
You might be listening to this thinking, I'm talking about some dystopian nightmare. But today we're looking at a structural blueprint that is terrifyingly real.
Very real.
For this deep dive, we are exploring the architecture of oppression.
Yeah, and it's such a massive topic.
It is. So to really understand the mechanics of this, we're using the rich, incredibly dark fantasy world of the book San Vitae, The Awakening as our lens.
Which is just a brilliant text for this kind of analysis.
Absolutely. We are taking the immortal rulers of this fictional universe and dissecting how they use the exact same psychological, sociological, and philosophical tricks that real-world authoritarian regimes use to keep everyday people in check.
Yeah, in the book, we look at the Santerrie, that's this ancient, immortal ruling class, and the oppressed human populations beneath them, known as the humanes.
Right.
But we aren't just looking at fantasy world building here. We are breaking down a composite of how real-world historical caste systems, colonial structures, and autocracies maintain total dominance.
Not just for a few turbulent years either.
No, for centuries at a time. We really want to understand how a society is engineered to keep the powerless compliant, while the elite remain entirely unquestioned.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because from the outside looking in, maintaining a tyrannical society for hundreds of years sounds, logistically exhausting.
Oh, it would be, yeah.
I struggle to see how the Santerrie actually maintain their iron grip on these massive populations without posting an armed soldier on literally every single street corner.
Right.
What is the actual structural blueprint here? How does that foundation get laid?
So the first thing we have to understand is that long-lasting oppression is never just chaotic cruelty.
Okay.
It is deeply and deliberately architected. A system like the one the Santerrie run, it persists because it is self-reinforcing, and it is embedded into literally every single layer of society.
So it's not just sheer physical violence.
Exactly. They rely on three interconnected sociological pillars.
Gotcha.
The first pillar is economic dependency.
Meaning, you control the resources to the point where the oppressed simply cannot afford to leave.
Precisely. If the ruling class owns all the land, the food distribution, and, in the case of this specific world, the magical energy resources.
The lower classes are completely trapped.
Right. If you rebel, you starve.
Wow. Okay, so what's the second pillar?
The second pillar involves political decrees. In the text, we see something called the Didreth Accord.
Right, I remember that.
On paper, it masquerades as a peace treaty, but in practice, it's a tool of ritual governance. It legally codifies the boundaries of what the humanes are allowed to do.
Essentially locking the hierarchy into the very laws of the land under the guise of, maintaining peace.
Exactly. So the law itself becomes a weapon.
And the third pillar.
Cultural narratives. You have to create these sweeping societal stories that glorify the elite.
Oh, so justifying their dominance is the absolute natural order of the world.
Yes. But here's the thing. All three of these pillars, the economy, the laws, the culture, they are held together by a single psychological mechanism. It's a concept introduced by the French philosopher Michel Foucault, known as the panopticon effect.
The panopticon, let me make sure I'm visualizing this correctly.
Right.
Originally, this was an architectural design for an actual prison, right?
That's right.
The setup is like a central guard tower surrounded by a circle of backlit prison cells.
That's the design, and the guard in the central tower can look out and see into any of the cells at any given time.
But the crucial part, the really insidious part, is that the inmates can never see into the tower.
Exactly.
So they have absolutely no idea if the guard is actually looking at them in that specific moment.
And that asymmetry of visibility is the entire point. Because the prisoners never know if the guards' eyes are on them, they are forced to assume they are being watched at all times.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. Foucault argued that when you scale this up to a societal level, it creates a system where people internalize the surveillance.
Meaning they start policing themselves.
Yes. They start policing their own behaviors, their own words, and eventually their own thoughts. The effects are profound because it fundamentally extinguishes the spark of rebellion before it can even form.
Wow.
In San Vitae, the Santerrie used this mix of constant surveillance and ritual observations to create a massive psychological panopticon across their cities.
You see this dynamic playing out so vividly with the character of Myasuchi.
Oh, she's a perfect example.
She is the Covenness of the city of Rouen, meaning she holds a position of leadership. But even as a leader, she has to constantly and carefully navigate this suffocating surveillance.
Right.
She is hiding her true motives, putting on this elaborate mask of total compliance just to protect her people from the Santerrie Council's overarching invisible eye.
She has to.
She's living her entire life inside that central tower's gaze, measuring every single word she speaks. It makes me think of, like an invisible electric fence for dogs.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Like eventually the dog just stops trying to cross the line. Even if you turn the power off entirely, the shock is just, it's internalized.
Exactly. That self-regulation is exactly how the system saves energy. The Santerrie don't need a soldier on every corner because Myasuchi is effectively guarding herself.
Okay, I understand the theory, but I have to push back on this a bit.
Sure.
Doesn't a system built entirely on fear eventually? I mean, doesn't collapse from the sheer effort of maintaining that terror?
You would think so, yeah.
Because historically, human beings hate being watched. Paranoia usually breeds resentment, and resentment breeds rebellion. You can't keep an entire population in check forever just by making them paranoid.
Right.
Eventually, someone calls the bluff. Someone decides to test the perimeter. Why hasn't the entire humanities population just collapsed this system from the sheer psychological exhaustion of it?
That is a very sharp observation. If the system relied purely on the terror of being watched, you're right, it would eventually snap. People would acclimatize to the fear and rebel.
So what stops them?
The architecture of oppression has a failsafe built in to address that exact exhaustion. It's something sociologists call the normalization of violence.
Normalization of violence. How does that prevent people from rebelling against surveillance?
Well, think about what happens when violence, cruelty, and extreme inequality become routine.
Like an everyday occurrence.
Exactly. When it happens every single day, right out in the open, society literally stops recognizing it as violence.
It just becomes normal.
Right. It loses its shock value, it stops being an outrage, and simply becomes culture. It becomes the invisible background noise of everyday life.
Wow.
The citizens don't call the bluff because the brutal consequences of the system aren't hidden in some secret torture dungeon. They are woven into the fabric of, like, normal Tuesday afternoon activities.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And there is an incredibly chilling scene early in the book that perfectly illustrates this.
The sands merchant.
Yes. We meet this wealthy sands merchant, and for those listening who haven't read the book, a sands is a human without any magical abilities.
Right.
But this guy has bought his way into the upper class. And in this scene, he is casually extracting corrupted Vitae from one of his own servants.
Which is just awful.
It is. Vitae is essentially the magical life force of this world. Extracting it this way is a disgustingly oppressive, violently invasive practice.
Yeah.
But the merchant is doing it just to get high, and the narrative treats it like he just poured himself a glass of expensive wine.
It's horrifying to the reader, but to the characters in the room, it's totally mundane.
Because they are so used to it.
That is the normalization of violence at work. When the cruelty is ritualized to that degree, it doesn't require active terror to maintain control.
Because the violence isn't an event. It's just the weather.
Exactly. But living in that kind of weather leads us to something even more insidious.
Because, I mean, if extreme violence is just the background noise of your daily life, what does living in that noise for 20, 30, or 40 years actually do to a person's brain?
It does a lot.
You can't just brush that off. There has to be a physical toll.
There is a massive physical toll, and it brings us to the neurobiological reality of learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness.
Yeah. This is a documented psychological phenomenon where individuals are repeatedly subjected to uncontrollable harm or stress. After a certain point of enduring pain they cannot stop, their brain's threat response system is fundamentally altered.
So they just give up.
It's deeper than just giving up. they stop trying to escape entirely.
Even if they can.
Yes. Even when the circumstances change, the door is left wide open and escape becomes completely possible.
Wait, why? If the door is open, why wouldn't you run?
Because of how the brain rewires itself under chronic oppression, the continuous stress suppresses the prefrontal cortex.
Which does what, exactly?
That's the part of your brain responsible for complex planning, decision-making, and imagining future scenarios.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And at the same time, it keeps the amygdala, the fear and survival center, hyperactive.
So your brain is essentially screaming that everything is a threat.
Exactly. Everything is a threat, while the part of your brain that could actually plan an escape is basically shut down.
That is terrifying.
It is. Eventually, this creates deep emotional numbness and a profound sense of fatalism. We see this vividly in the humanist populations who have lived under Santerrie rule for generations.
The trauma has quite literally reshaped their biology.
Yes. But the Santerrie don't just rely on this biological passivity, they weaponize it.
How so?
Using something called social dominance theory. They look at the humanis who are paralyzed by learned helplessness, and they feed them narratives that explain away that passivity.
Oh, so they use myths of, like, meritocracy and biological destiny.
Exactly. They tell the humanis, you are helpless because you are naturally inferior, and we are dominant because we are naturally superior.
Wow, so they dehumanize the lower caste to justify the very trauma they inflicted on them in the first place.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. There is a striking quote directly from the character Sharina that perfectly encapsulates everything we just talked about.
Oh, I love this quote.
She is observing the absolute dominance of the Santerrie, and she says, they don't need chains when the fear does the binding.
It's so powerful.
But that quote actually raises a huge question for me. If the brain is physically rewired for passivity, right? If the prefrontal cortex is shut down and the trauma has created this fatalistic numbness, is resistance just biologically impossible for these characters? Are they permanently trapped in their own biology?
That is the tragic genius of the architecture. Resistance isn't biologically impossible, but it requires an agonizing conscious effort to overcome one's own rewired nervous system.
It requires unlearning your survival mechanisms.
Exactly. You have to unlearn the very things that kept you alive up to that point. And what makes that unlearning process so incredibly difficult is that you aren't just fighting a single mastermind villain sitting on a throne.
Right.
To break free, you are forced to fight the very people standing next to you.
Because they're policing themselves.
Exactly.
You're fighting the middle managers of tyranny, the everyday people who just, punch the clock.
Yes. To understand how the gears of this brutal machine actually turn day to day, we have to look at philosopher Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil.
Banality of evil, right.
Arendt observed that the most horrifying systemic oppression doesn't thrive just because a handful of sociopaths at the top are giving orders.
Okay.
It thrives because totally ordinary people follow those oppressive systems without questioning them. They do their jobs, they fill out the paperwork, and they go home.
I always think of the banality of evil less like a comic book villain's lair and more like a massive disconnected assembly line or like cogs in a clock.
Yes, exactly.
They don't care what time it is, they just turn because the cog next to them is turning. The guy tightening the bolts on a torture device thinks he's just doing his job well. He wants to get a promotion.
Right.
He never sees the final product being used, so he never has to carry the moral weight of what he's actually building. He's just turning a wrench.
That's a perfect analogy. The disconnect is where the evil lives. In the world of Vitae, we see this chilling reality in the lower tier enforcers and inquisitors.
There is a harrowing scene where the main character, Kurien, wakes up strapped to a table in an inquisitor vault.
Oh, that scene is brutal.
It is, and the people torturing him. One is a humanist pureblood, a member of his own broader caste, and the other is a lower-level Santerrie attendant. Based on the rules of this world, they are theoretically supposed to be enemies.
But they're not fighting each other?
No. They're working together to torture Kurien with his cold, bored, bureaucratic efficiency. They aren't cackling villains enjoying the pain.
No, they're just clocking in.
They're just clocking in for their shift, doing horrific things, simply because that is how it has always been done.
And encountering that kind of banality, that cold, bureaucratic cruelty, creates what philosophers call existential oppression for victims like Kurien and Sharina.
What does existential oppression mean in this context?
It means the oppression goes far beyond just physical captivity or physical pain. Existential oppression is a theft of meaning.
A theft of meaning.
It's a theft of identity and agency. When the evil you face is so banal, so woven into the everyday fabric of reality, that the person torturing you is just bored by it,
Right.
it traps you in a world where you lose the cognitive ability to even imagine a different kind of life. It strips away your understanding of your own humanity.
Because if the guy hurting you doesn't even care that he's hurting you, it makes your suffering feel completely meaningless.
Exactly.
But this actually makes me wonder, if the enforcers down below are just following orders on an assembly line, what is happening at the very top?
That is a great question.
The rulers of this society, the Santerrie Council, they're immortal.
Right.
If you completely outlive consequence, what happens to your mind over centuries of ruling this architecture?
That is where we see the architecture begin to rot from the inside out.
Hmm.
In psychological terms, immortality is a massive cognitive distortion. Human empathy is fundamentally tied to our shared vulnerability. We care about each other because we know we are all fragile, we all get hurt, and our time is limited.
All right, yeah.
But if you remove mortality, you completely alter how an individual perceives time and consequence. Without death, urgency dissolves.
So an immortal being doesn't think in terms of decades or generations. They think in centuries.
Exactly.
They lose their tether to human timeframes.
They do, and this leads to two interconnected psychological states: empathy decay and existential boredom.
Empathy decay and existential boredom.
The Santerrie Council members suffer from a chronic state of meaninglessness caused by endless time. Without natural boundaries, their moral disengagement increases exponentially.
So they just stop caring entirely.
Over centuries, they resort to extreme decadence and unimaginable cruelty. But they aren't doing it out of passionate hatred for the humanities.
Why are they doing it then?
They are doing it as a desperate attempt to manufacture a sense of meaning. They inflict pain just to see if they can feel anything at all.
Wow. It completely reframes how we see the villains in this story.
It really does.
Later in the book, Kurien has this horrific realization about the ancient members of the council. He looks at them and sees that they're completely hollow inside.
Yeah, just empty.
There's no humanity left to enjoy their eternal youth. They are just numb, in different voids, inflicting pain simply to pass the time.
Exactly.
And to me, the ultimate tragedy is how this rot at the top forces the oppressed to confront their own inner demons just to survive the fallout.
How do you see that manifesting for the characters?
Well, look at Kurien's own internal battle. To survive this utterly cruel, meaningless system, especially during his time in the Inquisitor Vault, he can't just be a noble, pure-hearted victim.
Right, that won't keep him alive.
The trauma he experiences is so severe that his very identity fractures. He develops this demon aspect of his Vitae.
Oh.
Remember, Vitae is his life force, his magical energy. This demon aspect becomes a literal, physical manifestation of his repressed rage and his darkest survival instincts.
It's so intense.
The trauma of the vault is so intense that he loses 12 entire years of memory to this dissociative state while he's imprisoned.
Wow, 12 years.
He is forced to become a monster just to endure the monsters who are in charge.
Which is, tragically, the ultimate victory of the oppressive architecture.
Yeah.
It doesn't just cage you, it forces you to compromise your own morality and your own identity to survive within it. Kurien fears not what the system will do to him physically, but what the system requires him to become morally.
So what does this all mean for you and me?
Right.
Why dedicate an entire deep dive to the fictional politics, magical vitae, and social structures of the Santerrie and the Humanities?
Because it's not just fiction.
Exactly. It's because the true horror of this architecture isn't the magic or the fantasy elements or the demons. It's the psychology. Oppression isn't an accident.
Never.
Whether it's a fictional immortal council in a fantasy novel or a real-world authoritarian regime in our history books, it is a carefully constructed architecture.
And that architecture relies on very specific blueprints.
Right.
It uses economic control to ensure you can't afford to leave.
Yeah.
It uses panopticon-style surveillance, so you constantly police your own behavior.
And it normalizes violence until you don't even see the cruelty happening right next door.
Yes. It physically rewires your brain through learned helplessness until your prefrontal cortex shuts down and you believe resistance is futile.
Wow.
And it utilizes the banality of evil, ordinary people just doing their jobs on an assembly line to keep the machinery running smoothly.
These exact frameworks, social dominance theory, the banality of evil, learned helplessness, these are the actual mechanisms historically used by real-world autocracies, rigid caste systems, and colonial structures.
Very real, very tangible systems.
We study them in the context of fiction because they are sometimes easier to look at when they're wearing fantasy clothing, but the mechanics behind the story are terrifyingly real.
Which is why knowledge of these systems is most valuable when it is understood and applied. Recognizing these psychological patterns, seeing exactly how fear binds people without the need for physical chains, and understanding how systemic cruelty is upheld by banal, everyday compliance.
It allows us to critically examine the structures of power in our own real world.
Exactly.
Which brings us right back to where we started today. That prison without walls.
Right.
The one built so perfectly you don't even know you're standing inside it.
Yeah.
We've talked at length about how this architecture is designed to dictate not just what you do, but how you fundamentally think.
Yeah.
And I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over on your own.
Okay.
If an oppressive system is engineered so deeply into your culture, your economy, and even your own neurobiology, how much of your own personal rebellion is truly independent thought? And how much of it is just a programmed reaction, a designated role designed by the very system you're trying to fight?
Such a profound question to walk away with. When the boundaries of the prison are etched into your own mind, escaping requires a lot more than just walking away.
It does. Sometimes the hardest wall to break down is the one you unwittingly helped build. Keep questioning those walls. Until next time.